can America avoid another civil war? You know, there's little doubt in my mind that if Donald Trump thought starting a civil war would help him either gain or hold power, he would do it. In fact, I think you could argue that January could have been interpreted as just such an attempt, or at least, you know, the leading edge of such an attempt. Members would follow him into that. But could they pull it off? And could America be on the edge of a possible second civil war? I mean, most people think the civil wars are caused when the downtrodden get sick and tired and rise up, right? Like the stories around the French Revolution. But in the French Revolution, but that's the story, you know, Les Mis. You know, people think, oh, rich and powerful people don't start civil wars, right? It's got to be the poor people who start civil wars. Well, no, actually, it's almost always the rich and powerful people who start the civil wars. The American Civil War was started by rich plantation owners in the South. The Serbs, wealthy Serbs in power in the Balkans, started the Balkans War. The wealthy Sunnis in Iraq started the Iraq Civil War. I have been 3 civil wars in South Sudan and in Uganda, and in all 3 of those civil wars, they were started by elites. They were all started by rich people. In fact, that's pretty much the norm. You know, for example, hang on just a second, let me get to my list here. The first Sudanese Civil War, the Angolan Civil War, the Yemeni Civil War, the Liberian Civil War, the Guatemalan Civil War, the Nigerian Civil War, the Spanish Civil War, the Russian Civil War, the Syrian Civil War, the Ugandan Civil War, the South Sudanese Civil War, the Colombian Civil War, and the Lebanese Civil War. Every single one of them started by rich and powerful people who saw the possibility, in some cases because of demographic change, in some cases because of political change, you know, in some cases it was just exceptional circumstances, but saw the possibility that they would lose power. And so they launch a civil war, gain or typically retain power. And that's exactly what's, you know, the situation that we're in right now. A few dozen morbidly rich members of America's elite, including the world's richest man, are using input occasionally provided by Vladimir Putin in ways that could very well start a 21st century American Civil War. Barbara Walter is the Rohr Professor of International Affairs at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at University of California, San Diego, and one of the world's leading wars, violent extremism and domestic terror. She's the author of 5 books, including most recently, How Civil Wars Stop Them. And she identifies a bunch of factors that predictably create the conditions for a civil war. And today the United States meets basically all of them. The first factor that Barbara Walter identifies is that a country becomes an anocracy rather than a democracy. Now, anocracy was a new word for I heard this TED talk gave, and then started reading her work. And what an anocracy is when a country looks like a democracy. It still has elections, it still has tests, it still has, you know, peaceful transfers of power from one politician to another, one party to another. But basically, the country no longer serves its people. You know, it's kind of a variation on oligarchy, I'd say. So, you know, basically the trappings of democracy are there, but the actuality of democracy is missing. And that's America right now. If you think back to the era from 1933 until 1981, that 50-year period, 40, 50, 60, 70, yeah, 50-year period. During that period, Americans actually got what they wanted. I mean, you know, we got Social Security, the right to unionize, the minimum insurance, high-quality public schools, nearly free colleges, food and housing support for the poor, Medicare, Medicaid, voting rights, reasonably priced insurance, housing was affordable. All those things worked. In other words, government was working like a democracy. The politicians were doing. Wealthy elites were held in check by high taxation, antitrust, and the formation of monopolies. Good government laws set rigid limits on dark money in politics. More than half of the members of Congress came from the middle class. And the result was CEOs only took 30 times, and you know, the power of the morbidly rich was held in check. But since the Reagan Revolution, that's been flipped on its head. Newt Gingrich in the 90s convinced Republicans never go along with Democrats, you know, just say no to everything Democrats want to do. No more compromise. Billionaires and giant corporations have essentially taken over our government. Corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court decision, the Bellotti decision, and the Citizens United decision said, oh yeah, money is the same thing as free speech. Billionaires can own politicians, corporations can own, no problem. Unlimited money in politics. Ever since then, we've seen average American no longer gets what they want from their government. I mean, I've done entire programs about, you know, what polls at over 70%. Free college, you know, Medicare for all, higher taxes, the big monopolies. I could go on, but we no longer get, you know, action on climate change. We no longer get those things because the number one, she says that's the number one thing that causes civil wars, is that the in-power elites, and this would be the Republican Party right now, view demographic changes or political changes that are going to end up, they're going to lose their power. And so they fight back by starting a civil war. That's why I think that if Donald Trump gets elected this time or manages to seize the White House by, you know, with the help of the Supreme Court, for example, or, you know, the election gets thrown into the House of Representatives, however it happens, I truly believe he will do everything he can to start a civil war. He's already told us he's going to do that. He said he's going to send the military after Democrats like Adam Schiff and you and me. He said this. Well, that is the definition of a civil war. When the military comes after the people in the country, that's the beginning of a civil war. I mean, even Barry Goldwater, Richard Nixon, and Ronald Reagan were willing to collaborate or compromise and work with Democrats to get things done, but not Republicans anymore. A final factor that Barbara Walter points out is that there are over 400 million guns in America, and armed societies are much more vulnerable to violent civil wars than unarmed society. Now, the good news is that if Trump loses decisively this fall and the House and Senate, then we could reverse the anocracy. We could go back to being a democracy. We could do that, and Kamala Harris has said these are her top two priorities, by getting control of money in politics and giving people an absolute right to vote, stopping the suppression of the vote. And, you know, that would be a wonderful thing. So here's these two options. Do we want Donald Trump and the probability of a civil war, or do we want Kamala Harris and Democrats taking the House and Senate and the probability of America actually moving forward and becoming more and more small d democratic? Those are our choices. At least that's how it looks to me. What say you?